And we are live. Welcome to Olivia's Stories, ladies and gentlemen. I kind of cheated on my husband with his boss because I thought my husband was a pansy. Yes, I had thought my husband didn't have what it took to be a man. He had always come off as timid and weak right from when we had been dating in college. I had overlooked it because I had thought he had come from money. He had looked rich from college. That's why I had set my eyes on him in the first place, but as we progressed to marriage, I didn't understand anymore. All the wealth he seemed to have displayed was no place to be found. My wedding hadn't been as lavish as I had dreamt it would be. His parents hadn't even shown. It was all a disappointment because, to be frank, I had married him because of his money and not any love. I could never love a man as timid and weak as my husband was. Yes, I was a gold digger, and I had been digging for gold with my husband. Now imagine my shock when the rich boy I had known before had to get a job and be submissive to a boss. It had been disgusting. Asterisk, wretch, asterisk. Before you all self-righteous bunch come under this post to yap at how selfish I was, I already know. I believe I was very clear when I said I didn't marry my husband for money. Anyway, watching my husband get a job and suck up to a boss when he once had money was downgrading. Before we had gotten married, my husband spent lavishly on me, on material things, basically anything to make me happy. Imagine my shock when I married him and now had to be, in his own words, managing. That hadn't been my style before I had gotten married, and I couldn't be expected to somehow adjust my lifestyle because of him. I had tried for the first 2 years. I thought he had been testing me or something, that he'll pop out one day and be like, I still had money to my name. I just wanted to see if you could stay with me when I had nothing. But as the days and months went by with nothing to show except my husband's shy and weak demeanor, and our ever-fluctuating checking account because I really couldn't be bothered as long as I was fine, I got tired. Yes, I got tired of my husband and I hopped on the ride for temptation. This came in the form of my husband's boss, who ticked every box I loved in a man. Strong, confident, powerful, dominant, and most importantly, rich. Whereas my husband cowered and ran to do his boss's every whim. I know that's the whole point here of working for someone, but watching him do it at their annual workers' retreat had done something to my ego. That's where all this started. My husband had told me that he had a party at his office that was for workers and their spouses to strengthen the family bond and whatnot between workers. So I had agreed to go because being in the spotlight is kind of my thing. The night had been going perfectly fine. Drinks, talk. My husband had even introduced me to a few of his colleagues. But then, as the night progressed, he was running out to get something or finish up something at his boss's request. So I had decided to go see what he was up to one of those times, and my mind was blown. You guys couldn't have imagined. To say I was shocked was an understatement. My husband's boss was giving my husband a scolding about how he couldn't do his job properly, and my husband stood there nodding his head like a sad lost puppy. I was flabbergasted and disgusted by my husband. Later, when the party was about to end, the boss decided to show his face and thank everyone for coming, so I decided to feel him up, you know what I mean? Turned out he was everything I liked in a man, and he had the hots for me. It was like a match made in heaven. Did I have second thoughts about cheating on my husband? Of course not. But I hadn't known it would come back to bite me in my butt. It was supposed to be a one-time fling, like an experience with a real man because I had missed that. But boy, was I wrong. Before I continue on, I want to give you all a little backstory to how my life was before I got married to my husband. My name is Nyla, and I'm 24 years old. My husband's name is Kevin, and he's the same age as I am. I was a partyholic. I loved parties, and that's how I met my husband. He had just been like me in college, attending parties, showing up and showing out and having no care in the world about grades, and the fact that we had come to college to bag a degree. Degrees were worthless when you had the money to do what you want, and I had the backing from my parents who thought I was studious as ever in school. Lol, imagine their shock when their daughter was dropping out of college and getting married. I had been their nightmare. Now, I don't think they want anything to do with me. Anyway, my husband was just like me in every regard. We matched and vibed, and he was rich as a, I don't know the expression to use here, but he was massive rich, if you get what I mean. His parents were in the wine business, and it was a generational wealth kind of thing. He had money to lavish, and I was his girl, so I was down for that kind of life. He asked me to be his girlfriend, and within 6 months, I was getting married. I was 23 when I had gotten married, and I thought that my life was going to be ease and soft life and trips and vacations and Birkins and Prada. Our wedding had been a flurry of activities. His parents hadn't attended because apparently they didn't like the fact that their son was getting married when he still had his life in front of him, and the fact that he was getting married to someone like me, no less. They weren't happy with the wedding, and they had not deemed it important to attend their son's wedding. Just as I hadn't deemed it important to go and see them as a dutiful daughter-in-law while I had been courting my husband. Lol. I didn't have the time for all of that then. I had been too busy dreaming of how I would spend my husband's money. We got a house at Pacific Heights and everything was going well. Then, imagine 2 months later, my husband coming to tell me that he would have to start working. My dreams shattered just like that, and I thought he had been playing with me. But truly, my husband started working and we started living from paycheck to paycheck. According to him, his parents had threatened to cut him off from the family if he didn't do something about HSI reckless spendings, and they seized his cards and every access to family funds. I couldn't cope. In my defense, I had tried to wing it out with him and, manage everything, but the resent was already building in my heart. My parents had already cut me off, and I needed to find a way to keep up with the things essential for my well-being. So you can imagine what went through my head when I saw my husband answering to someone else, and that someone else had something I needed. Of course, I had cheated, and it had been fun. I had sought out my husband's boss, and he hadn't known who I was. It had been a rush to fool to me. Some of you can't relate, and I'm not going to apologize for how I was. Like I had said, I had sought out my husband's boss one fateful evening after work, and I continued seeing him while my husband was there in the sidelines. Did I think I would get caught? I like to believe I was a cunning person, so I didn't think I was going to get caught. In fact, I hadn't been scared by that possibility. I wasn't planning on leaving a man who was far superior to my husband and provided for me all because of the fear of getting caught. Did you know my husband had the audacity to tell me to cut back on my spending? He had no right, so I wasn't at all scared of getting caught. And I had always been careful of my surroundings. When I was around my husband's boss, my phone was always off and in my bag, so there had been no chance of my husband calling me and his boss picking it up by mistake, or a chance of us running into my husband at a restaurant or hotel, because San Francisco was huge. There was no chance of also running into my husband's parents because they preferred to stay in their estate in Italy and not the fancy life of San Francisco. A win-win for me. See, I'd had everything totally secured. My husband's friends weren't my friends, and the only friends I'd had were college friends. And those ones didn't care about my behind ever since I dropped out of college. I had nothing to worry about. Yeah, I was as delusional as a tortoise thinking it could beat a cheetah in a race. My dream was upended once again right in front of my eyes. My husband's boss was the one to call me out first. No, now that I think about it, my husband had probably been the one that had found out first, but the chain of events from my perspective back then, it was my husband's boss that had called me out first. I didn't know how he got to find out I was married, but I remember I had gone to meet him during our scheduled meetup day, and he had thrown pictures from my wedding day in my face and demanded to know how I was married to the man that was his employee and why I was cheating on him. The poor man thought I had been a setup by my husband to undermine his competence in the office and say I was sleeping with his wife. I tried to explain to him that what he was thinking was way off from the real reason I had sought him out, but he threw a tantrum and threw me out of his house. Who knew dominating alpha men could throw tantrums? I learned that on that day. I had learned that and the fact that my soft life was coming to an end and how I needed to do something about it. God forbid I get a job, but maybe I could persuade my husband to talk to his parents and allow his cards to start working again. I mean, I could promise not to overspend, but I needed to spend or I would go crazy. Like I said before, I had never been more delusional. With the mindset of going to convince my husband to apologize to his parents so they'll let us have access to funds, I stepped into my home and saw my husband screaming and almost tearing his hair out. I knew I was in big trouble when my husband had set his red eyes on me and screamed. That's how I knew he had found out. Well, the screaming and the scattered pictures of me going into different hotels and restaurants with the man that was meant to be his boss. My husband had asked me why, and no sound had escaped from my mouth. I was, in fact I am, normally not the quiet one who would let go at the start of a fight, but I couldn't find the words to answer my husband's question. I had nothing, and he had left the house. My husband had come back a week later, and everything resumed back in our lives. He had asked me no questions about it, and of course I had thought whether I should have apologized for what I had done. But I know a real man wouldn't like that, so I had left it unspoken. Everything went back to normal, literally. He was talking to me and asking me questions, but he hadn't asked the most important one, why I had cheated on him. Well, I didn't see any point in bringing up past pains over a month later, and decided to keep it to myself and ask what I had been meaning to ask before. If he could probably talk to his parents to put us back on the funds receivers list. I wasn't working, and before you come at me saying I shouldn't be proud of that, I didn't care about anyone's opinion back then, and it hasn't changed. And my expenses weren't balancing with his paycheck. I was a high-maintenance babe, and I didn't want to end that. So I had approached my husband and told him that he should consider going to apologize to his parents. That day, my husband lost it on me like I had never believed he could. According to him, if I just shut up and got a job to offset my expenses, then he wouldn't have to go back to his parents. Something about being a grown man and one stupid thing. Can you imagine that? Me, working, and him being grown? Heck, he wouldn't know anything about being grown if it was stuck to the fridge and made visibly clear. Besides, he hadn't married me for that. He had married me for the fun and the good time and the vibes. That's what I had ever been known for. So what was this talk of getting a job? Well, I told him what I thought of him and his stupid idea, and he told me he wouldn't have been in this mess if he hadn't married me. I had been hurt by that statement, and at that moment I thought I should prove him wrong, that I could make something out of my life. I dropped that idea about a second later, by the way, and had to find a solution to my dwindling checking account. So I did the most stupid thing. I went back to my husband's boss and received the backlash of my life and a threat to expose me to everyone I had known. Plus, he added he would make my life more miserable if he saw my face around his office ever again. I took my tail and skedaddled out of there like it was on fire. I hadn't begun to know the side effects of my actions until my husband decided he was finally tired of all my BS and got revenge on me. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It was like a well and carefully thought-out plan to make me lose my sanity and hate him and myself too. A month later, my husband came home and said he wanted to do something special for me. I was as shocked as you are now reading this. How did he want to do something for me after all the nagging I had given him and the cheating I had done? Yes, I had still been nagging him about going to talk to his parents and telling them to reconsider not giving us any money. He was their only Don, after all. Anyway, I thought this something special was a way of him telling me he had talked to them and they had reconsidered, and we had lavish money to spend again. He had told me to wear a special dress and look good, and I was spiked. I was happy that he had listened to me, and we were finally doing something that was fun ever since we got married. We got to the restaurant and I ordered everything that could be ordered because this was a first time in a long while kind of outing for me. And also with my husband. You guys wouldn't guess the event that unfolded after we were done eating. He played the oldest trick in the book on me. Prior to me finishing my food, my husband got up and said he needed to use the restroom, that he'll be back in a jiffy. Unaware of what was about to happen, I nodded my head and continued enjoying my food and the ambiance of the restaurant because I hadn't been there. So imagine my shock when after about an hour the waiter handed me the bill and my husband was nowhere to be found. I had been played my own husband. Can you imagine being played by your spouse? If it had been a boyfriend or a guy I met on Tinder, that would have been easy to digest, but my husband, someone I was supposedly stuck to in good and in bad. I had tried calling his phone, but it had gone straight to voicemail, and the waiter was getting impatient because I had cleared my food and they had a number of people waiting to get in. That night, I did something I had never done in my life before. I had to borrow money from a college friend. My husband had abandoned me at a restaurant, and I had to get money somehow, or risk being sent to jail, and that's another thing I have never done. When I confronted him about it, he said he had an urgent work thing to do, that's why he ran out on me and couldn't get the bill. That was a cheap lie, and he knew it. He didn't even offer to make it up to me, and I began to suspect something was happening. As a result of that incident, I stopped talking to my husband and knew I needed to get something done to sustain myself and my needs, so I began working for the bakery down our block. No one should come at me for finally realizing I had done it back then to somehow gain my husband's trust again. When my husband saw what was happening, that I had gotten a job, he started leaving me a little money and my plan had worked. I quit the job, but always pretended to leave the house and walk down the block to the bakery while he left for the office. Once he was out of sight, I turned back and headed to the house. So with him finally giving me money, I thought we were on good terms again, so when he told me he wanted to take me shopping, I hadn't doubted that he wasn't genuine. We had gotten to the store and I had picked out the items I wanted and a little extra and had gone into the dressing room to try on the outfits. I hadn't even blinked when the dressing room curtain was swept open and about 3 women came at me telling me I was a thief and they were calling the police on me. I had no idea what they had been going on about, but apparently as I was being manhandled out of the store, my husband was nowhere to be found again. The women dumped my handbag on the floor and found a bunch of lingerie folded up together like someone had squashed it in there to frame me. That's how I spent the night behind prison bars. And I realized my husband was out to ruin me. He hadn't come to bail me out even though I had called his number countless times, and I had to wait till the next morning before I paid my own bail with the little money he had been leaving me and was released. When I got home, my husband was still nowhere to be found, but he had left a note saying that I was going to cry and beg in front of him for a divorce. I hadn't known that was going to be the story of my life until it actually happened. After the note, my husband didn't step foot into the house for a whole 2 weeks while I was nipping my nails away in worry and dread over what was to come. And it came. I got back from going to ask a friend to lend me some money, which had been unsuccessful by the way, and saw a party going on at my house in full swing. Like a classy dinner party, and I was walking in looking all tattered and tired of life. Then I realized it was a trap set by my husband the moment I set eyes on my mother. My husband was about to do the worst, but before I could run, he announced my presence to everyone in the room, and all eyes turned to me. There was no way to escape the shame and humiliation that came next as my husband started his speech about how we had met and whatnot. It was our 1-year wedding anniversary, and he was choosing to disgrace me in front of everyone that somehow knew me. A slideshow began playing in the space behind him. It started with cute pictures of us before and after marriage, and it ended with pictures of me cheating on him with his boss. I felt the eyes of everybody before I heard their gasps, and I had to hand it to my husband. My mother walked up to me and slapped me hard before leaving the party, and I saw my husband's mother planning to come and do same, but someone was holding her back. I walked up to my husband and told him that he was despicable for destroying my image when we could have settled it quietly. And he lost it again on me. He began telling me how I was the one that ruined his life and how he should have listened to his parents about me and my bad influence. He said I was the reason his parents had cut him off because they wanted him to learn the consequences of marrying someone like him, who was only after his money, and he had told them they should butt out of his business because he had believed I had truly loved him. Lamau, I had never heard from a more delusional person in my life. He told me I was a good-for-nothing leech, and I would never have anything good come from life for me because I had deceived him into marrying me, which I never did, by the way. He had been the one that wanted to marry. The insults I had gotten that day still stays with me till now, but the cherry on top of the cake that made me beg him for divorce so I could run away from the city was when my friends started calling me and saying they were seeing me on poster ads that I had herpes, and people needed to stay away from me. Apparently that had been my husband's boss doing because my cheating with him got him fired, but my husband had put him up to it. I begged my husband for divorce like I had never wanted anything more, and when I signed the papers, I got on my flight to New York from money that I had borrowed from someone who owed me big time. Yeah, so that's my experience, and I'm learning to be a better person after the whole thing. But I never knew my ex-husband could be so revengeful. It still shocks me, and I'll definitely have the shivers anytime I recall my experience with him.